Alright. The affirmative would like you to believe that having a national ID would solve all fraud and change the voting system to be 100% clear. This is not necessarily the case, however, because misrepresentation is not significant enough to actually be an issue to mandate IDs across the country. The cases of actual voter ID, actual voter fraud, are so small and so rarely occurring that it is not something that actually needs to be addressed, especially when it comes to spending money on that. In a study published by Columbia University political scientists, they tracked rates for 2 years in 2014 that the reports of voter fraud were primarily traced back to false claims by the loser of the race or administrative error. So many of the cases itself have been wrongfully stated. And they say the point that the Americans distrust the electoral system, which is completely irrelevant to the actual voter fraud issue. The amount of people who are dead by a new election are so small, like people are not dying enough at a rate to where people would use them to win elections and votes. And it is spread across the nation, in which it means it is more weak if they were attempting to change the election results, because as opposed to all in one state. If they got all these dead votes and put it into a state, maybe it would change the amount of electoral college votes and the value of that to influence election. But across the nation, the accounts are too small to actually influence. And another issue is 2% of the mail is rejected. So if 2% is the actual documented error, that is not a percentage to be taken very serious. Additionally, how would voter ID fix the mail problem? It would not change it at all. Misrepresentation is not a real issue that is important enough. It is not big enough to be an actual issue in the grand scheme of things. And another thing is California. I don't know if they use California as an example, but because we are a heavily populated state, but California has poll watchers that their job as volunteers and are taught to actually go to the polls and make sure that people aren't coming in twice or faking or using any other method of cheating the system. And the present system has actually functioned throughout all the time. It has not actually had a true case of corruption. Adding more laws could already make the low voter turnout rate even worse. America is infamous for having low voter turnout, and it could affect the amount of people who actually want to go to the polls if they have to get an ID to go through the process. Also, since no true controversy has occurred and not enough evidence to actually prove that it's a present issue, it is not needed to make an ID. Mandatory national IDs are counterintuitive to actually expanding voter rights, because current states that are pro-ID are generally more conservative. All the proposed states that have done it and seem to favor, one party seems to favor it over another. And in the case where this can be discriminative is that people who can't actually afford ID, it seems crazy for most people to think that nobody can afford an ID, driver's license or whatever, but some people don't either have the time or the money. There are people who actually cannot do that. And so that would actually eliminate an entire group of people who are able to vote, and that would actually shrink voting rights. Also, in itself, making these laws can be considered unconstitutional, since every citizen should be able to vote as who they are. If they are American citizens, nowhere in the Constitution does it say you need to prove who you are to vote. A 2010 book categorizing reported incidents of voter fraud concluded that nearly all allegations turned out to be clerical errors and mistakes, not fraud. So even if these claims of instances where there is voter fraud, they seem to turn out to be wrong in itself. And a study published by the Washington Post in 2012 found that 31 instances of fraud from 2000 to 2014 were only 31 incidents out of 1 billion ballots. So even if voter fraud did exist to the point where it would be an issue, it is too small to actually affect an election or outcome results. It is not actually present enough to be taken seriously, even if it did exist. And back to what the points that they were saying, the mail situation would not be changed at all. The dead voters who are casting by absentee, it would not change at all. There is no solution to that, and additionally, Americans' distrust towards the electoral system does not affect it at all. And